and that's where I think that, like, yeah, this whole idea of music as a language, as a way of communicating, comes in, and I think also, if we would be able to really carry that towards the audience, then I think the audience would also be appreciative of it. But because, as you said, like, the pop music world is doing it, and they're successful with it, because that's what people ultimately want from music, that it communicates to them. And nowadays, I feel that in concert halls, in a way, I mean, you've probably seen also discussions about scantily-clad pianists, for instance. No, I mean, it's there, and
It does happen, yeah.
it does happen, and in a way, it could be argued that, yeah, that's also a way of communicating with your audience.
Of course, it's a form of communication. It depends on what you want to communicate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but it's the thing that, like, it fulfills a desire that when we reach a point where the music making in itself becomes indistinguishable. That's a cruel way of putting it. I don't mean that everybody plays exactly the same, but where the differences are minuscule, that suddenly that this is a way to stand out. But standing out is not just only a way of standing out, but really communicating actually to an audience.
No, of course, the great musicians are the musicians that communicate. Let's
Right.
be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, we can point to them because they do exist.
Yeah.
The fact is that we're not really training our students in that direction.
Right.
We're kind of training them to play the perfect piece.
Right.
And while the great performers are actually communicating.
Yeah.
So that's also a kind of a dichotomy that I see in performance. Yeah. But we're also not aware of what we're communicating because we've never thought about the whole idea that we perform concert music in temples, and that the stage is high for a reason, and that the people are wearing tuxedos for a reason, and that the lighting is there for a reason, and that the framing and the curtains. We don't think about any of these things. Because we're not really interested in that aspect of music. Yeah.
It feels very often like it's a very idealized image of the music making that we want. I remember I thought about it myself some point recently only, that when I play a concert, I don't only want people to come to listen, or I project, and I think that it applies to many of us. We don't only want people to come to listen, we want them to come to listen for the right reasons. For the reasons that we think are like pure and holy. And if then people come to me after the concert and they say something that doesn't live up to that expectation of high lofty standards of like the highest of art, then we're kind of disappointed. We think like, oh, these people are dumb. I mean, nobody would put it that way, but we tend to think that way, that like, it's disappointing that they don't appreciate it on such a high level as I do. And then it brings me to the question that I've been asking myself for the past 1.5 years, and I think which is the core question which we all need to answer ourselves these days as musicians, which is what role does music play in today's society actually? Because it's not an easy question to answer, and it's also not that there's one correct answer. In the end, I think that is a question that everybody needs to answer for himself. When we're thinking also about like, okay, what is my place in this world? Am I the 20,137th best Bach player in the world? Is that sort of my role? Then who needs that? But I think that if we believe that there is intrinsic value in music and what it can communicate, then all we're interested in is to actually find ways to actually communicate that to people, and finding and understanding the ways what role it fulfills in a way.
Now we have a little bit of difficulty with aesthetics. We feel, of course, that there are certain works of art that are great works of art, and then there is what we call kitsch. So if my grandson only reads Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, then we think, well, someday he will develop and his taste and read actual literature. And I think we kind of forget that it's not about what you like, but it's about liking. It's about being able to value something for what it is. And I think it's important for my grandson, when he reads Donald Duck, that he is valuing that for what it is, that he has this experience of something wonderful that he's having. The same thing when I drink a glass of wine, it does not really interest me if it's from the right year and from the right chateau or something like that. The most important thing is, what do I think of it? And I think in the terms of aesthetics that we have kind of lost the ability to say, this is what I like. And in literature and in art and in music, we kind of think that our role as classical musicians is to teach people to like things, to like Bach, to like Mendelssohn. I really don't see my role as a teacher in that sense. I teach people to understand what's happening in music by doing it, by playing music, by singing music. I don't teach them to like a particular type of music. And so I think that if we would rethink our role in terms of aesthetics, what am I actually doing when I go out on stage? I'm not trying to fulfill someone's aesthetic prophecies, or I'm not trying to convince them that this is a beautiful piece of music. Not really at all. No. I am trying to communicate what I feel the music is saying to me. Right. To an audience, and I think that's the most authentic type of performance that I can think of, and we frequently see that when you do that, that you actually do communicate. I remember in my own experience as a musician, I discovered at a certain point in my career that when I was teaching a pupil in the studio, and I wanted to demonstrate how I thought a particular phrase should be played, I would play it for the student, and then I recognized the fact that my performing in the studio for the student was much better than out on stage. That out on stage, that my playing was actually very uninteresting and flat, and that I actually was not doing the same thing. I was playing the same notes. I'm sure I was trying to play it very beautifully out on stage. But I was not trying to communicate anything about the music to the people that were sitting there. Right. And in the studio, I was really trying to communicate the beauty of this phrase to my student, who I thought didn't completely understand what was happening in the phrase. And that kind of changed my way of going out on stage. I was playing the same pieces, but completely differently. And I also discovered when I became an accompanist that when I went out on stage with a singer or a violinist, that I was doing something completely different than when I went out on stage by myself. Then I was just playing the piece as well as possible, as beautifully as possible. When I was playing together with a different musician, I was actually really in a dialogue with another musician, and everything the musician did affected what I did. And that was one reason for me to kind of concentrate on chamber music and accompaniment in my own professional career as a pianist. But I also had so much more enjoyment just by communicating with one other person out on stage. It made music for me interesting.